and welcome to the Parenting and Bonding with Children's Book podcast, where we believe that books are magic and have the power to transform homes. On this podcast, we talk to the authors behind the magic to find out the true intentions behind the books. And tonight, we are here with the author, Payal. Hi, Payal.
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you for letting me be on your podcast today.
Oh, I was so excited to have you back. If you guys are familiar with the show or just with Aidyn's books, you might remember that Pyle came to us last year. It was last year, and she read her book about reluctant speakers.
Mhm.
And let me remind myself of the title, Silent Sally Speaks. Yes. And so I was like digging into what Pyle does, and I was like, this is awesome. Like, we need to have her back for the podcast. So I'm so excited that you're here.
Amazing. I'm so excited to be here and to share my work with everyone.
I know the parents are going to be so excited. We get many questions about this across our different platforms. So I'll just give you guys an intro to Pyle, and we'll get going from there. So Payal Burnham is a registered speech language pathologist with the College of Audiologists and Speech Language Pathologists of Ontario. That was a mouthful for me. And she's a member of the American Speech Language Hearing Association. And so you guys can see why I was so excited to have her here. I know that a lot of parents deal with different things and just have questions in this space. So having an author with such credentials and experience is just amazing. And so she does have experience with preschool, school age, and adult populations in a variety of settings. And she was here before to read her book, Silent Sally Speaks, which is about reluctant speakers, but she also has experience with autism and Down syndrome. And then Silent Sally Speaks is also selective mutism as well. Correct?
Mhm. That's
Yes.
correct.
So again, what did I miss? Anything else you want to share?
So in terms of some of the other work that I do as well, so I do work with
Yeah.
kids that have some speech related concerns. So that may
Okay.
have trouble with articulation or pronouncing specific sounds, as well as stuttering, some voice based concerns. And just going back to the articulation, so some of the other books, I do have a couple of other books in this series. So at least Lily's Lost Smile. This one focuses on the production of the L sound. So it does focus on like the articulation aspect. So if your child is having trouble pronouncing that L, then some of my books do focus on the articulation of different sounds.
Okay. Thank you. And is your plan to go through all the sounds in your books?
Yes, I'm really hoping I can get there. I definitely do have a plan of going through a lot of the sounds, at least a lot of the common sounds that a lot of our children, as they're developing to speak or developing their language skills, that they have trouble with. So I'm kind of focusing on sounds as not necessarily sequentially, but more so based on the story. So I always think that it's great to have a good story versus just packing a book with words that target a specific sound.
Yeah.
While I am thinking about the sounds, I really want to make sure that the children really enjoy the book and are able to empathize with some of the characters, or are able to relate to some of the characters in the book some way. And so I think that that's what's kind of driving a lot of the stories and a lot of the sounds, I guess, that I'm working on in my books.
Got you. And that's why I love your book so much, because of the stories in them. So if you had to tell us, like an elevator speech, what the stories in the books are outside of the sounds, what would you say?
Sure. So with Silent Sally Speaks,
Mhm.
I don't know if you had the opportunity to be a part of that last podcast, but this generally follows a young little girl who is beginning a school, or beginning to go to school, or maybe going to a new school. And she's quite shy and
Mhm.
anxious about speaking in the classroom. And she kind of becomes nicknamed Silent Sally, and all the kids learn that she doesn't really talk. And so, generally, when it comes to opportunities in the classroom that encourage her, that require her to speak, a lot of the kids speak for her or make the comment, Sally doesn't speak. So they start
Mm.
teasing her a little bit, and that just increases Sally's anxiety and kind of makes her push away even more. So it's really about Sally kind of overcoming that challenge and that fear of speaking in the classroom. And having worked with a few students that have been selectively mute, it is quite a challenge. And I even remember working with this little girl in my practice. And for her, because she started in kindergarten, a lot of the kids kind of came to know her as this little girl who didn't really speak. The minute a new person would come into the classroom and they would ask this little girl what her name was, all the kids would jump up and be like, "Oh, she doesn't talk. She doesn't speak.
Okay.
Her name is this." So they would often speak for her and didn't really give her that opportunity to kind of come out of her shell. So I had the opportunity to kind of observe her in the classroom and work with her one on one. And surprisingly, I was able to kind of ease some of that anxiety, help her understand that I was just a friend and that we would do some fun things together. We worked on a lot of reading. We actually read a lot of stories that pertain to her interests and kind of discussed different things. And slowly but surely, initially she wouldn't speak to me at all. Then one day she whispered something. She whispered hi. And that eventually came to, I think she started telling me the colors, her favorite colors. So she started whispering her colors, and then she started talking to me in a low voice. And then one day, which was so surprising, out of the blue, we were just carrying on with our session. I'm like, okay, we're going to read our book. And she was so excited about this book we were reading. It was about ponies. And I guess she has a love for horses. So the minute she saw the pony or the horse, she's like, oh, horsey or something. And the minute that came out, like it was so nice to hear. That minute that came out, she completely forgot about her fears. And I think one of the greatest things about her kind of gradually getting to that level of speaking was the fact that there wasn't anybody in the room to react to her, to that change in communication, right? So even when she started to whisper, it was just very natural. There was no aha moment, or there was no like, oh, there's her voice. There were no comments like that were made to make her even more
Okay.
anxious. I think that was had to do a big part of it. So even when she screamed horses and I was thrilled in my mind, I'm like, oh my God, she did it. And I'm like dancing. I just carried through the session as if nothing had happened. And I think that was the key to really getting her so comfortable to be able to get her voice out there.
That insight from you is so so needed, because I can also think about maybe less, I'm not going to, I'll use the word severe, but less
Mhm.
severe situations where we
Mhm.
are just afraid to make maybe like a positive change or something like that because of how people may react to it.
Mhm.
So the fact that, you worked with her and, just so many good things there. It was a beautiful story for you even to just share. So that was great. Do you find that with and you called it's selective mutism, right?
Mhm.
What are
Yes.
some other reasons that you've come across why a child may choose not to speak or be hesitant, reluctant to speak?
Well, you know what? I think one of the main reasons is it has to do with anxiety.
Mm,
There's generally factors in the environment that are causing that child to be anxious, especially if they already have a very shy personality. If they're already a little bit more reserved, if they're a little bit more shy, sometimes that anxiety is there and we don't really recognize it. And even for parents who might be, kind of pushing their parents or their kids to, like say hi to that person, right? They don't
yeah.
realize that in those moments that they're just increasing that anxiety, right? And not giving that child that chance to kind of go on their own time or when they're ready, right? So
Okay.
many of these children are highly anxious. Sometimes we do also see selective mutism when children don't have the language, when they realize that their ability to communicate, even use sentences within the classroom, is quite limited compared to some of the other kids. And you'll be surprised, like children are quite bright even at such a young age, and they will kind of observe their peers and see what they're doing or what they're capable of communicating, and they will start comparing or making comparisons. And I think we all do that as humans. We just, it's just a natural innate instinct that we have when we like enter new situations. So a child going into a classroom who sees all these other kids being able to use so much vocabulary or maybe even communicate in full sentences, that child might become very aware of that, and as a result kind of stop talking because they realize they don't have that ability or that skill level to be able to do so. And this also goes for kids who may not be able to pronounce sounds. So when they realize that they're not able to be clear, and even though they've
Mhm.
tried and they haven't, and there's been a lot of repetition on their part, or they've always been asked for clarification, you might see that in some of those kids as well, who just kind of become a little bit more reserved and then just kind of stop talking because they realize they're not getting anywhere with being able to deliver their message appropriately. So a few different reasons for sure, but
Yeah.
generally speaking, for kids who are selectively mute, it definitely has to do a lot with that anxiety piece for sure.
Thank you for that. And I feel like we speak so much in the group about the power and the magic of books and how
Mhm.
reading to our children is so important because we give them words in order to be able to express themselves. And one of my next questions for you was, I guess, around the books, like you have so many tools at your fingertips as a speech pathologist to be able to use when dealing with different communities and different, I guess, conditions. Why books? Why did you decide to start writing books?
Well, that's a great question.
Mhm.
I think children's books have always been um, a great interest of mine. I love books and I use them so often when it comes to doing what I do, right? So, in a lot
Mhm.
of my therapy sessions, a book is definitely there because I think it just really allows us to see the extent of a child's language and how much they're able to how much they know, and also how where they can go from what they know, and you can build upon so many different skills. But for myself and my writing, I think that just kind of came in the spur of the moment. I gave a birth to a daughter a couple years ago, and there was one night I was just sitting, and I was putting her to sleep, and I was thinking about a student that I had worked with, who was selectively mute, in fact.
Yeah.
And I was just looking for a book to try to see if I could find something that where the student would be able to kind of empathize with the character, where she could kind of relate to a
Mhm.
character, to help her through some of those feelings and emotions that that typically accompany selective mutism. So
Mhm.
in trying to find a book or something like related to that topic, I was having a hard time coming up or finding something that I really wanted. And so I'm like, okay, let me try writing something. So I started like took my phone out on my notes app, started like jotting down a few
Yeah.
notes. And then initially it was supposed to simply be more of like a social story. And I don't know if a lot of you know what social stories are, but generally social stories are around more like social rules or social expectations of what you can do in different scenarios, right? So I was thinking about a social story, but as I started writing, it turned into more of a narrative. So it turned into more of an actual story following a girl. And then I remember running downstairs like the next morning after I had like put a rough draft together, roughly, and I told my husband, I'm going to write a children's story. And he's like, haha, laughed it off. Right. And lo and behold, it became a reality. So yeah, that's how it kind of started. And after that first book that I read, I'm like, okay, I can write another one. And I think having my daughter around has been a blessing in disguise, only because I find a lot of my stories kind of develop around things that she teaches me, or things that we do together. And I think that's how a lot of the stories come about. And I think that's been really, really exciting for me.
Yes, thank you for that. And I think reading the books from a perspective such as yours as a speech pathologist is so important. And you have a newer book, right? Kingsley's Great Escape. And the
Mm-hmm.
title is a little, for me, it was different than your other
Yeah.
two books. I'm like, oh, okay, because we introduced an animal as the
Mm. That's
as the
me.
main character.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
so when I saw that come out from you, I was like, okay, this is interesting. So tell us about Kingsley's Great Escape.
Sure. So, Kingsley's Great Escape, it's about a cat
Mhm.
who he himself is quite reserved and shy. He's almost the perfect cat in that, he basically follows all the rules, right? He knows where to find his food. He never has accidents. Knows where his litter box is. He's loved by the family that he's with. But then things start to change because we have a new family member who arrives, and Kingsley, being the only kind of little kiddo in the household, if you will. Initially, he's getting all the attention, but once this kid arrives, he's not really getting all of that attention anymore, and so he becomes quite skeptical of this new kid that's in the household. And it just kind of follows his journey and how he kind of learns to manage, or learns to cope with having another family member around that has to kind of like that he has to share his time and, I guess, his love with. So yeah, it's a really nice, I'm hoping, heartwarming little story about this
Mhm.
cat and his journey to really, I guess, accept this new kid in the household, but also for him and learning to kind of deal with that. So yeah, that's what Kingsley's Great Escape is about. And with Kingsley, it does focus on the K sound, the K, which is generally an earlier developing sound. So if you have kids in like kindergarten, 4, 5, even 6 years of age, this is a great book because that K sound is generally the sound that we're kind of looking at around those ages. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Kingsley is adorable.
Thank you.
And so the L sound, that's great that you said that with the K sound, or what you
Mm,
said,
yeah.
the ages. So what about Lily's Lost Smile? The sound focused on that book. What age range would you say parents should start paying attention to that?
Yeah, so when we're thinking about the L's in the beginning and in the middle of the word typically start emerging around 3.5, between 3 and 4 years of age.
Mhm.
Generally, those L's at the end of the words, those are a little bit later developing. So sometimes we may not target that until around 5 or 6, even.
Okay.
So it's a huge range, but if you do notice your child struggling with the L, especially at the end, and they're around, almost 5, maybe 6, that's probably a good time to really start addressing that.
Okay, thank you for that. And your illustrations, the all of your books are so adorable. Can you tell us about your illustrator? Are you using the same one for each book?
So for the first 2 books, I did use the same illustrator,
Okay.
and that was through Tellwell Talent, the publishing
Okay.
company that published the books. For Kingsley, I decided to take a different route, and I hired my own illustrator. Her
Oh,
name is
exciting.
Yeah, it was quite exciting. It was really quite interesting in terms of finding an illustrator that would kind of meet my vision of what I wanted for the books, and I think she did a fantastic job with Kingsley. So she is an illustrator actually from the Philippines. So
Okay.
just given like the I guess time difference and stuff, it's surprising what we're able to do virtually nowadays. We've definitely entered a new world. But yeah, so I kind of explained my vision to her, and she seemed to be able to, produce these really cute illustrations, and I think she's done a great job. So hopefully for the next book, we'll try to see if we can use her again.
Okay. And with Kingley's Great Escape, what do you want families to walk away with after reading the book?
I think this story is really about acceptance.
Mhm.
It's about love and acceptance and being okay with change. I know,
Mm.
even if we're thinking about some of our kiddos who may be younger and are still kind of developing and trying to learn what their role is within the world, or even if we're thinking about some of our students with special needs, if they have like autism, for instance, sometimes understanding the size of the problem and understanding that, maybe what a small problem is for us might be a big problem for them, and understanding, what an appropriate reaction to that problem would be. I think that's a really key concept, I guess, in this book. So it's really about acceptance, understanding what the problem is and how to kind of overcome it and what might be an appropriate solution to that. So I think that would be a nice message that families learn to take away, and hopefully that kids come to understand and learn as well.
I'm noticing that you're mentioning the anxiety around change quite a bit.
Hmm.
Is that what you come across most in your practice as, like, the reason for some of these, of course, not like autism or Down syndrome, but in
Hmm.
some of the other cases, do you think it's mostly based in anxiety?
Not always. Um,
Okay.
I think recently the population that I've been working with, definitely anxiety is a huge factor.
Mhm,
Sometimes it definitely, the diagnosis or even like the family dynamic has to deal a lot with it as well.
mhm,
Like for instance, if we're thinking about our kids who might have just some articulation concerns, or that
okay,
are struggling with specific sounds, anxiety might not really be the case. I think that's just more like a developmental area, right, where they're still kind of learning how to move their tongue and move the parts of their mouth to be able to produce the sound accurately. So I think that's a little bit more developmental, and I think it comes with time and comes with practice.
mhm,
But for some of our other kiddos who might have more complex needs or more complex profiles, anxiety definitely has to do with it, or even just not even anxiety, but even just being able to adapt to change. I think
mhm,
that's a big piece for a lot of them, because we talk a lot about transitions even in when working in schools. We talk a lot about, okay, is that child going to be able to transition? And
mm,
I think it's probably, my focus has kind of shifted there, because just even given the pandemic, it's
yeah,
always, we have to be ready to pivot, right? Even with school, like we're doing virtual and then we're back in the classroom and then we're back to virtual again. So everything's always been, over the last couple of years, I should say, has been about that change, and how students are adapting and responding to that. So I think that's probably where that theme has been kind of stemming from, for at least my last book, and the other two too.
okay, okay, thank you for that explanation. I was just noticing that quite a bit, and I'm like, "Hmm, what can we do what can we do here?"
Like,
I'm always
now that I
looking
think of it,
for
I'm like, what is my next book about?
I'm always looking for what are the signs for parents that may be an issue, and what can we be doing at home to help, and your books are definitely a great foundation, and a start.
Mhm.
Um, and so I don't know, because you deal with so many different populations and so many different, issues. I guess, what is one of the main things that you see present coming into your office, and is there anything that parents can do or look for around it?
Around it,
Mhm,
sure. So I think one of the main concerns that parents do bring up is definitely has to do with the communication aspect. So,
mhm,
my child is not talking, or my child has words, but they're not using sentences yet, and even that social interaction piece is huge. So my kid is speaking, but he doesn't want to play with his brother or sister, or he's not engaging with peers in school.
mhm,
So a lot of that, I think, has to do with just kind of stepping away, I think, from the immediate scene, and just kind of taking a step back and observing your child. I think we sometimes rush into kind of jumping to conclusions, or we rush into thinking that our child is struggling with something when they might not be, and we're not just giving them their time or their um, or not giving them space, I should say, to be able to kind of develop some of those skills on their own time and independently. Or even, I think, just taking a step back and observing what your child is doing will give
Mm.
us a lot of information on how we need to support and how maybe we need to kind of scaffold to help them to get to that skill level that we're looking for, to get to that point where they're able to use sentences more effectively. So I think really that observation, like that observe, wait, listen, is
Mhm.
huge, especially before we decide to kind of jump into different ways or different strategies of how to support. I think we need to understand what's going on first.
Thank you. And I know in the beginning we talked about how you use books in your practice and just in your work, um, quite a bit, you said, right?
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
when we're thinking about like autism and Down syndrome, I don't know if this is going to be a too complex of a question because I haven't fully thought it out all the way. But how can books help there? Like, how do you use books as a tool in those
Mhm.
situations?
So, I mean, if you're thinking about a student with complex needs, or like a diagnosis with autism, for example,
Mhm,
um, one of the best things about books, especially picture books, is that they're quite visual. Right. And
mhm,
we know with our students with autism, even Down syndrome, a lot of them are visual learners, and they have a really great ability to, their visual memory is generally stronger than their auditory memory. So even as you're telling a story, if they can kind of reference a visual, that only will boost their comprehension, versus if we were just having some text on a page and getting them to try to visualize what's going on. Our kids respond to visuals. They're a reference point, and it really supports not only their vocabulary development to, for them to comprehend what's happening in the picture, but also for them to be able to extract the meaning of the text, right? So I think the picture books are great for them, and definitely, like I said, they act as that visual reference to be able to support some of their language skills as well as their comprehension, which generally is a big area of concern for our students with autism as well as Down syndrome sometimes.
yeah, and your perspective as a speech pathologist is this is the first time I'm speaking to somebody on this platform with your experience, and I'm
Mhm.
sure that just what you said just now really helped to facilitate your work with your illustrator as well,
Mhm.
because I don't think a lot of authors have that perspective on a relationship. Maybe I overspoke, but your unique perspective, right? A lot of them don't have that when it comes to the relationship between the text and the illustrations.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think, I mean, I definitely pay attention to the detail in the picture a lot more, and
Mhm,
the types of colors that are used, or even the amount that's going on in the picture, right? So I think that is huge as well, because we don't want something that's too overstimulating for some of our kids that with special needs, right? Because then you're just going to lose them completely. But kind of keeping it simple, and related to the text that you have, I guess, that accompanies the picture. I think that's a key point for sure.
awesome, thank you. Is there this comes up a lot with dyslexia, but this is not, I know parents of children with special needs are always wondering what should we look for in books? Like how, and your books are perfect, for this. Besides the pictures, what different elements do you think you added to your books in consideration of children with special needs?
I think if there's a somewhat of a teaching component that's embedded, so
Mhm,
definitely looking at the illustrations. But if there is, some books do come with kind of almost like instructions for families in terms of, how it's meant to be read. Some books are meant to be kind of read by by the child, and parents are just simply supporting their reading. Some books are meant to be read by the parent and then discussing, I guess, important vocabulary. I think things like that, if there's any a little bit of some instructions, I think that's really helpful. But vocabulary is key, I think, as well.
Yeah.
So if books do accompany a list of vocabulary, even if it's not even if it's not related to the book, but maybe it's like grade level vocabulary or age level vocabulary that parents can follow and kind of teach and kind of discuss on their own outside of reading the book, I think that's definitely key to not only develop like emergent literacy skills, but that will also facilitate comprehension and vocabulary development as well.
Okay. And you talked about books, certain books being for like the child to read and books being for the parent to read and just support. In writing your books, how did you intend for parents to use the books?
Right. So I think I intended the parents to be the main readers, the main readers of my book, but definitely using it as more of an instructional tool. So while the books can be read like a story, which I think hopefully they are good stories just to be read like anything. The goal was for educators to be able to use the book and then engage in a discussion of some of the vocabulary that's either used, or to engage in discussions about maybe the feelings or emotions that the child's going through, and having that child empathize with the character that's illustrated in the story. So I think with Silent Sally, I do have some questions actually within the book that parents can use or educators can use to discuss not only what's happening in the story and kind of navigating the feelings and emotions of Sally in the book, but also how they are feeling, how their child is feeling, and how they might be navigating the same situation or that same scenario. So it's definitely more educator focused for educators to be able to read the books with their kid. But like I said, I think the stories on their own are quite great. I mean, of course I'm biased, but I think they're quite great. And so even if you were to read them, as like a bedtime story or a story, with your child on a weekend, I think they serve as great books on their own as well.
Okay. And Kingsley's Great Escape is your newest release. Did you want to, I'll leave you on the screen. You can show a couple pages if you want. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Kingsley's Great Escape. It came out before the holidays, and like I said, it focuses on the K sound. So in the book, we do have a list of K words again for parents who might want to work on the K sound with their child. And here are some books. So this is Kingsley there. I'll just show you a couple more pages. Go. All right. So hopefully that gives you a good idea. And I mean, the illustrations are quite bright and colorful. So hopefully that engages your child in wanting to read this book. I think it's a fun book to read.
Thank you. Thank you so much for showing the inside pages. Is there anything else that you want parents, educators to know about your books?
No, I mean, please look out for more. There is another one coming, and the next one's going to be focusing on dyslexia. So definitely look out for emails. Follow me on my Instagram and Facebook pages. Check out my website for any updates or events that might be happening, especially as things start to open up and go back to somewhat of a normal. I'm hoping to be able to hold more author events to be able to invite parents to discuss any sort of concerns that they have with respect to their children's speech and language development, or even just discuss the books in general and how they can be used with their children or students. So just definitely follow me and look out for a new book coming out probably in the spring.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. And I've been putting up on the screen where you can find Payal. You can find her at teachaspeechbooks.com. And then also her Facebook and IG are first, Teach to Speech Books, and then on Twitter at Teach to Speech. And I'm excited, very excited about your next book. I've read your first two. I have not read Kingsley yet, but I'm also excited about the next one coming out, focusing on dyslexia. I know that I often hear questions when I'm choosing books for parents. If they reach out for book recommendations, they often ask, do you have books that are how do you say it, that are friendly for children who may have dyslexia? So interested in that. Thank you so much for being here.
No problem. Thank you, Quinn. It was great.
No problem. All right, everybody have a great night, and thanks for joining.
Bye.
Bye.